2. So hi everybody, welcome to the ROI Group. I've forgotten how many we've done, but you know, it's now getting on to 8 or 10 of them, I think. And we're very lucky today to have with us, you can see in the top left hand of your screen if you're looking, we're very lucky to have a special guest today, Dan Stevens from Business Development Bank, the bank for entrepreneurs. And you guys all remember that we record these sessions. I put them on YouTube so that we can refer to them later. And for the other people who belong to the ROI Group, who can't attend these sessions from noon until 1:30 Eastern time, they can watch it later on. And we usually get 20 or 25 people live, and then we get about 50 or 100 people who watch it on YouTube, sometimes a little bit more. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Here we go. And so you should be able to see, I'll get it on full screen here in a second. You should be able to see my screen. Dan, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can see it.
All right, okay, so you can see my slides. Now everybody remember, you can stop me and later on Dan at any time. There's a chat box, part of your Zoom window. There's a chat box there, and so if you have any questions at any time, I monitor the chat box, and you just type in there any questions that you have if I'm not being clear or you need a clarification on a point that Dan will make. So again, welcome to the ROI Group, and we're going to get started. It's now 12:02. I'm Bruce Firestone, your host and moderator. And as I said a little bit earlier, before we started recording, we have a special guest today, a friend of mine, Dan Stevens from BDC, the Bank for Entrepreneurs. And Dan is going to tell us a little bit later. I'm going to do a presentation first, but later on, Dan is going to present and tell us more about what BDC can do in terms of financing us as entrepreneurs. You can see his contact information here, but when we get to Dan's slide deck a little bit later, you'll see that again. It's Daniel Stevens. I think that's your cell number, Dan, 613-698-3616.
Yes, that's correct.
And you can see Dan's email address, daniel.stevens with a V at bdc.ca. So if you want to get in touch with Dan afterwards to talk about what you're doing and your business, you can do that. And some people have been asking me, you know, we've been doing this now for a few months, why we formed the ROI Group, the Return on Investment Group in the first place. And that is really to help people learn how to build bigger, better businesses. First in real estate, because I'm a real estate guy, but also in other sectors. So if you have a personal business for life or you have a real estate business, we're trying to make those businesses better. But the other thing is because, you know, being an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, it can be quite a lonely life. So the ROI Group is there to sort of kind of support people. And I was blown away recently. I just got this yesterday from BDC, by the way, and the Canadian Mental Health Association, that 62% of business owners feel depressed at least once a day. I think it's actually once a week. I might have got that wrong, but it's a huge number. So I think, you know, the idea behind the ROI Group is you're not alone, that there's a lot of good people in the group, both on Facebook and here live and also on the recorded sessions, who can provide support, people like myself and people like Dan. And if the ROI Group does nothing other than maybe help each of us earn a little bit more in our businesses, improve our businesses a little bit better so our earnings are better, that's probably good, because I think the number one stressor for most people is finances. Anyway, here's the material. I don't know if you've seen this, Dan, but this came from BDC and from the CMHA, and there's the number right up on your screen. 62% of business owners feel depressed at least once a week. So it is once a week, not once a day. I apologize for that. But that is a huge number, and that is a very telling statistic, because when you're feeling depressed, it's hard to get out of bed, let alone run a business. All right, and on this subject, I wanted to just take a moment to talk about a friend of mine. He has now passed. His name was Peter Patafie, came from a very modest background. He was a self-made millionaire, and he was a guest speaker back when I was teaching at Carleton University, and he shocked a group of young business students in my class. These were all young entrepreneurs I was teaching, when he said his priorities were as follows. He had 6 priorities. First, take care of your business so your business can take care of your family, so your family can take care of you, so that you don't become a burden on society. Fifthly, so you can take care of other people and other people can take care of your business. It's a big circle. And then one of my students, a young woman, said to Mr. Patafie, Mr. Patafie put up her hand and said, surely you've got the first two in the wrong order. You know, if you go back to the previous slide, surely, she said, your first priority should be to take care of your family, right? And your second should be take care of the business. And he said, no, miss, that's not my view at all. He said, do you know what the #1 cause of divorce is? And she said, well, I guess you don't love them anymore, which seems logical enough. But the actual reason why I think she felt, or Peter felt, excuse me, Peter felt that it was financial stress is if you have, debt collectors calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning, when can we expect payment? That's very, very stressful. So overall, I think one of the big objectives of the ROI Group is to make sure people don't feel that they're alone, that there are others out there they can reach out to. And #2, hopefully you learn something that helps you improve your business so that you can scale it or your earnings improve. So to people who wonder what the heck we're doing, I think that's the best I can do. Now, just before I go on to my part of this presentation, which I'm going to talk about in just a couple of minutes, I wanted to just again introduce Dan, who's going to speak after me. He tells me that BDC does not do residential mortgages. So if you're going out and buying a single family home and you're going to add a basement apartment and kind of make it a duplex, they don't do that residential mortgage, but they will help with commercial and multi-residential above a certain size, I think, and Dan will talk more about that when he gets there. But there's a very important point that I wanted to make that maybe, Dan, you won't have thought of yet, or maybe you have, and many people on this call and people who will watch this video won't understand either until I explain it. And that is, I'm asking everybody on this call and people who follow me, on Facebook and on LinkedIn and follow my blog, to stop doing projects and start developing a business model. And there's a big difference between what a business model is and what a project is. And I'm going to show you a couple of very simple examples, but I really want to emphasize that if I were going to Dan Stevens at BDC to ask for help, I would not, in all likelihood, I would not be going to ask Dan, or any bank for that matter, or any lender, or any investor. I would not be asking them for help with a project. VCs and investors don't want to hear about projects. They want to hear about a business model. And let me just show you what a real estate business model looks like. Most of you have seen this. This is one of my daughters, and she bought this half of a double on Splinter Crescent here in Ottawa. This is a project that she did, but it's not a business model. It's a kind of a one-off, right? So you remember she put a basement apartment in. It's quite a nice little 1-bedroom apartment. You can see the basement has its own ingress and egress, and she rents that out for $1,200 or $1,300 a month, which means that she can live in her own, 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath house here that you see on the screen for about $500 or $600 a month. It's a wonderful project, but it's not a business model, and that's not the kind of thing that really investors want to talk about, or venture capitalists want to talk about, or banks or lenders. They want to talk about something different. Now, I think Alex is on the call, and Alex Colligan, he'll certainly recognize this. This is a business model, not a project. And what Alex Colligan and Stefan Gonthier did was they bought this property in Greeley on Meadow Drive, and it has a 1-bedroom. They put a 1-bedroom apartment in the lower floor here. I think it's a 4-bedroom apartment upstairs. I think there's a bit of a co-working space here. But what's the difference between one I just showed you and this one is that it also has a detached garage, which they turned into a workshop. Now, how does that make it a business model? So you'll see that in a minute. So I think everybody knows, I believe we're headed towards a gig economy. And pretty much everybody has a side gig. I don't know if Dan has a side gig, but I do. I'm a real estate investment and business coach, and I'm a realtor. That's kind of my gig. But, there's a million different types of people doing kind of side gigs. So they might have a real job, but they have a gig. And in the gig economy, you might want to have a workshop or what young people call a makerspace. So this project here could have, you know, 2 apartments in it, a bit of a co-working space if they wanted that. And then this could be turned into some kind of a workshop where you could run a gig. Now, this could be a workshop. It could also be a yoga studio, a nail bar, a hairdressing salon. Who knows? There's a million and one different gigs out there. But then Alex and Stefan went into the backyard. This thing has a huge backyard, and they built this. I'll show you what they built. You can see the concrete slab going here, and you see the shell on the ground there. This, I think, is Alex, and there's Stefan. This is Simon Case when looking at the place. It's a beautiful site. And here's Alex proudly showing that they've now built a humongous workshop. I don't remember exactly how big it is, but it's about 1,600 square feet, I think. And you can see as it was under construction what was going on. And this is kind of what it looks like today. And interestingly enough, it has you know, a man door or person door on one side and an overhead door and on the other side. So it could be divided into 2 spaces for people who have some kind of a gig going on. And I suppose if you wanted to turn it into a big yoga studio or workout facility, you could do that too. So the difference between a project and a business model is that a business model is scalable. And you might say, well, how is this model scalable? Because it turns out that you can search, I'm a realtor too, you can search MLS for quote unquote detached garage, and you can find a zillion properties, not just in Ottawa, but in Toronto, in BC, in Alberta, in Montana, in a million and one places where you can actually buy these properties, existing properties, and do what Alex and Stefan did. So that is kind of a business model, and it can be scaled. All right, and I want to show you another one. This is kind of one of my favorite ones, and I've got a zillion of these business models, by the way. So if you're interested in doing a business model as opposed to a project, I'm your guy. So this one I call Next Step Foods, and it's a way to kind of invent plazas. So let's say you told me, hey, Bruce, I'd like to buy a bunch of plazas. That's going to be my business model. It's a pretty competitive market. So I said, is there a way to invent a plaza? And I think there is. And here's an example. This is a convenience store, again, in Ottawa that has failed. And many of these convenience stores across North America are in serious financial trouble. So you look at this, and most people would look at that as a problem. But I look at that as an opportunity. And what do I mean by that? Is let's say you owned a vegetarian restaurant that was very successful, or a small cafe that was very successful, or you knew somebody who owned one that was very successful and they wanted to scale. You can search MLS across North America, perhaps many other nations as well, and you can find properties like this where you have convenience stores that have failed. They're for sale or for lease, and you could probably buy the convenience store and you could probably buy the building. I'm going to go back a slide. So this particular building, I think, has 6 or 7 residential units, and it has a failed convenience store. And you would replace that convenience store with something like a very successful business in Gatineau, Quebec, called Edgar Cafe, which is this little tiny place here. It's only 600 or 650 square feet, but very successful, great food, very scalable, right? So how would you do that? Again, you would just simply search MLS for these kinds of buildings where they have convenience stores. And what's really cool about this model is you don't have to rezone them, right? Like to convert from residential to commercial can be quite a process in most cities and towns. These are already grandfathered in. So that is a business model, not a project. Now remember, guys, if there's any questions, you know, I'm gonna make sure you guys all see it in the chat. I just said questions to everyone. If you have any questions, type it in the chat bar. You'll see it kind of flickering yellow on your screen now. Please stop me at any time if I'm going too fast or you have a question for me. Anyway, so if we went to Dan Stevens and BDC with a business model or to investors, they're probably going to listen a lot more closely than if we just go with a project. All right, so I'm going to change directions now. I've been working on this for quite some time. And I was going to do more of it last time, sort of last month, but we ran out of time, you know, because we were just doing other things. And I'm super, super frustrated, not just with the city of Ottawa, but San Francisco, Los Angeles, Austin, Nashville, Toronto, Vancouver. Boston, you name it. These are very desirable cities to live in with strong economic engines, but we seem somehow in 2020 to have forgotten how to produce enough affordable housing. It's just incredible, and I can't understand why that is. So before I go on and explain to you what I think is going on, this is just Ottawa. I mean, 19% increase in resale prices in a single month in January of 2020. So that's not very long ago, and 9% in all of 2019. These are incredible acceleration in prices. Why is this happening? Here's my answer. Now, this will not be popular with some municipal politicians who may at some point or other see this video, but municipal politicians tend to cater to their political base. It's a perfectly natural thing for them to do. And what is their political base? It turns out it's homeowners. Most of the people who vote in municipal elections are in fact homeowners. They're generally not renters. Renters tend to be more transient, and they tend not to vote in municipal elections. And so it makes sense, I guess, for municipal politicians to cater to their political base. And because they're listening to these folks, they don't make additional land available for development. They don't. They freeze the urban boundary. They don't allow more mixed-use buildings, where you have residential and commercial in the same building. That's not always easy to do. And they've increased development charges from when I was a much younger person, which was $0 to $30,000 or $35,000 a door in Ottawa. In many places are even higher. I'm working with Claridge. I sold them a property in Barrhaven. They're now in their 9th year and still do not have an approved plan of subdivision. 9 years to get a 38-acre piece of land approved and registered. That's a long time in a life. I mean, you might work for 50 years or 40 years. 25% of your life is taken up on one project. So when you put all of those things together, no expansion of the urban boundary, not enough supply, much higher costs of building, certainly completely out of your control, it's no wonder house prices are ratcheting up. All right. So I hope I made it clear. So who gets hurt? Well, basically it's renters and young people who want to become homebuyers. I have 5 kids, and my oldest daughter, Rachel, lives in Toronto with her fiance, Patrick Kerr, and it costs between $1.4 and $1.7 million to buy a townhouse in downtown Toronto. I mean, it's completely out of reach for young people, or most young people anyway. My dad, Professor O.J. Firestone, in the 1940s and 1950s, worked with Minister of Everything, an American who was based in Ottawa, C.D. Howe, on post-war reconstruction. So it's not that we don't know how to produce more housing. The pictures you see on the screen here are these very small, I think, 2-bedroom post-war buildings that were popped up by the thousands and thousands across Canada and the United States to provide housing for returning veterans from overseas, from the Pacific Theater and from the European Theater. So we do know how to produce enough housing. It's just that we've refused to do that. And I think that's a real problem. And maybe we could say, well, we have Ottawa Community Housing. Maybe they can provide enough new housing. But I know Ottawa Community Housing. I coach them. And they can do maybe 150, 200, or 300 units a year. Just to put that in perspective for everybody, if you think about it, Ottawa-Gatineau created 50,000 new jobs last year. That's a lot. And we built just about 73 or 7,400 homes. If you do the math, you can see that obviously there's a disconnect. So we are not producing enough housing. And if anybody tells you there's another solution to unaffordable housing other than increasing supply, I don't agree with that. So when I put all of this together, and I think many of you know, this is one of my hobby horses, who are you going to call? Are you going to call some guy who knows some guy to help you resolve this? Are you going to call your realtor, your architect, your planner, your project manager, your brother, or your sister, your best friend? I don't think so. I would vote none of the above. And why not, just say, turn it back to the urban planners and say, you guys, you men and women, you fix it. Well, if you look at what kind of an urban fabric we're actually producing, we're producing cities and towns that look like this. This happens to be Renfrew, but there's plenty of places in Toronto and Duncan, BC, and all over Canada, the United States, that look exactly like this. These are junk towns, in my opinion. And so I don't think the answer is going to be that our urban planners or our architects are somehow going to magically reverse what has now become about a 70-year process that has resulted in this. Some of you know that I spent 14 years, that was my sentence, teaching at the Carleton University School of Architecture. And it's my opinion that architects basically gave up on urban design and allowed urban planners to take over. So what it means is that we're producing cities that look a lot like this. So this would be a suburb with these dead ends. You can see these dead ends here, and they've got these P-loops. They've got these arterial roads and highways that can get completely congested. So our urban planning and our urban design and our architects, and everyone together has kind of conspired in a way to produce really, really bad cities that are completely hostile to human beings, in my opinion. So many architects now are just order takers, and we've probably got a few architects on here, so they're going to give me heck afterwards. I know that, but they're just order takers now. You know, you go to the city, and the city says, well, you can only build this high, and here's the ingress and egress. They even tell you what the materials are going to, what kind of color and materials you can use. I mean, we're just order takers now. And we're allowing people like traffic engineers, urban planners, politicians, to spec all of our cities and towns. And frankly, these people, you know, I'm sure they're well-intended, but they're producing really, really bad results. All right, and here's another one that I think everyone knows if you live in Ottawa or if you ever visited. This is another terrible street at Maryville Road, and what a treat. And so you have to ask yourself, why does an Ottawa street look like this, this is Richmond Road, supposed to be one of our best streets, and a Paris Boulevard looks like this. What are we doing wrong? And I'm going to say to you, and again, you've heard me say this before, that we built better towns and cities, in my opinion, in the 1930s and 1940s. We've been rowing backwards since there. And this is a Christmas postcard of Bedford Falls, which was featured in the film It's a Wonderful Life. And if you look at this street, you can see it has organized street trees down the middle. It has street furniture so people can stop and chat and sit. It's got two-way traffic. It's got on-street parking. It's got lots of life at grade, retail at grade. It's mixed use. It's got all kinds of, you know, residential above. And you can see even in the middle of winter with all the lighting and other cool stuff that they've done here, you know, it really has some life to it. It's very walkable. And if you think about, if we go back to Maryville Road, you know, where would you rather walk, whether it's cold or not? Maryville Road or Bedford Falls, the imaginary town. So what is the answer? And this is the real point of what I'm going to do today before I hand it back to Dan to finish off today. And that I don't think we can give urban design back to urban planners and to architects. I think that ship may have sailed. I'm disappointed. Many of the schools, you know, remember I taught architecture, many of the schools are very focused on pretty, but not utility and not ROI. I mean, we are the ROI group, right? And when I say ROI, I don't just mean for us as investors or developers, I mean for the community as well, for the neighborhood. So what are we going to do? What's the answer? So I'm working on a new book. You know, I think you all know that I only have one addiction. It's not to drugs or alcohol. It's to writing. Ask my wife. So I'm working on a new book called Gadgets and Gizmos. This is the Gizmos. This is the cover. How to tell if you own a real business or just an expensive hobby. And I've had a few expensive hobbies. But in this, I am going to deal with what I think is a relatively new concept, which is that I think we need to define a new position. And maybe the city of Ottawa or the city of Toronto or San Francisco, LA, etc. Maybe they should hire a few development managers. And maybe you should too. So a development manager has a much, much broader set of skills and a much broader role. He or she is really a facilitator. And let's look at some of the skill set that I think the development manager has to have. And it's a long list, so bear with me. I'll get through this as quickly as I can. They can provide you with some advice about site acquisition, whether it's a piece of land that you're going to develop, or it's a building, an existing building that you're going to buy and animate. And everybody knows when I talk about animation, it means adding new revenue streams. They can help you with some due diligence, because due diligence is important. You want to know what you're actually buying. They can actually look at the zoning and give you some advice on that. They can help you with highest and best use, how to put the property to its highest and best use. They actually know something about urban design. They actually know something about building design. They know how to structure the financing and to structure the ownership. And that's very important, because it might not just be you. It might be you and a partner, it might be you and a co-venturer, it might be you and some investors. Who knows? There might be a lot of aspects to it. And then they'll help you hire the right architect, the right engineers, right? And people who will play along to develop the best project they can with the highest ROI for you as the owner, but also for your future tenants and for the guests that will visit there and the passersby and for the community, the neighborhood. It's a multiple bottom line. They'll understand the process of animation, which is something that I have been working on with many of you now for years. It's new. How to add new revenue streams that are surprising and pleasing and add value. Like, for example, putting in a backyard workshop like Alex and Stefan did. They know how to define a functional program, what uses the building or the site is going to be put to. They can help you with a concept plan, and a concept plan can just be something that's sketched out. You know, I do a lot of sketching, just hand-drawn sketches, and I've worked with some wonderful architects like Gino Rossetti, who helped me with the Palladium Canadian Tire Center. And Gino, even though he was very good with computers, and his son, Matt Rossetti, even better, they always carry with them a sketchbook, and they still believe in just hand-drawn sketches, and then, of course, CAD drawings later. Your development manager knows something about putting a pro forma together and a real budget. They can do a spreadsheet analysis. You should do a spreadsheet on every project, right? And you have to know how to do the cap rate and how to calculate internal rates of return. And your development manager needs to know that too. Then they can go with you to the city or town or county or township that you're developed where you are, and they can help you with the pre-consultation, and they can push back on the city and the urban planners and others who will be there, the traffic and transportation people and the infrastructure people, if they're giving you some grief. They can help you with meetings with your local councilor and your mayor. They can help you with neighborhood meetings. They can help you find the right construction manager, project manager, and general contractor. They understand tender documents. You can see this is a long list. They can help you understand and evaluate tenders by your subtrades. They can help you get, if you're developing new stuff or renovating, they can help you get a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price from your contractor. Very important, especially in bigger projects, but also small ones too. They know they know the difference between a shop drawing done by a subtrade and an architectural design drawing. They help you with critical path scheduling, so you can actually get this thing done on time, hopefully, and on budget. And again, as I told you, they understand official plans and master plans and zoning. If you're doing some minor stuff like severances or lot line adjustments or minor variances, they understand that process, and they understand site plan review. It goes on. They can help you with your site plan application, your subdivision application, your building permit application. If there's any change orders during construction or renovation, they look at them before you sign them, because you can blow your budget with change orders. And they make sure that there's coordination going on, and there's not a lot of finger pointing between your general contractor, your construction manager, your project manager, your engineers, your architects. They always tend to blame each other. You know, the HVAC guys, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning guys, the mechanical guys blame the electrical guys if something doesn't work, and the reverse is true as well. And then they know something about leasing, proper leasing. And many of you know, Tristan Peltier and I did an hour-and-a-half tutorial, I hope you have time to look at, on proper residential leasing. Most people think it's easy. There's more subtlety to it. And if you haven't got that link, it's on YouTube, unlisted, but it's for the group. Let me know and I'll send it to you. And then, of course, getting a good appraisal is incredibly important, because if your appraisal comes in too low, your refinancing is going to be a problem. And people like Dan Stevens are going to look at you with hard eyes if you get a bad appraisal. So they have to be able to talk to appraisers and talk about fair market value. They have to be able to give you some financing advice, including mortgage takeouts. They have to know something about commissioning buildings, making sure all the systems are running. And there's probably a million other things I haven't included, but that's a long list. Okay, what are the main risks in construction, development, or even renovation? Now, even a minor renovation can go horribly wrong. My friend Robin Chahal has a great story to tell how a 4 or 5 month minor basement renovation turned into like a year, and his budget, I think, like doubled or tripled. I don't remember, but it was a great story, although it's kind of a bad outcome. So what are the main risks? I mean, you can get zoning delays and site plan delays, obviously, cost overruns I talked about, delays in construction. And then after everything is finished, I don't know if you guys have heard about the tail light guarantee. Your contractor gives you a guarantee that lasts as long as his taillights are visible. A lifetime guarantee, but only lasts until he turns the corner and you never see him again. So your development manager has to be on top of that as well. Something else that I think I would teach development managers, because I am going to teach some people to do this role. I've been performing that role for many, many years, but now I'm going to teach some others to do it. Is a good friend of mine, Sheila McKee, was a counselor in West Carleton. The township doesn't exist anymore. It was absorbed by the city of Ottawa, but Sheila was a very smart person. And she said to me, because as a younger person, I was quite confrontational. She said, Bruce, you can look at zoning and city planning processes in 2 ways. Either it's an endless confrontation and battle, or it's an opportunity for affirmation between the developer and the community. And she said, I really want you to think about that. And I did. And I changed. I had a come to Jesus moment, and excuse me, and I realized that I would have to change. And so I would talk to the neighbors, I would talk to the community association, the business improvement association, counselors, planners, architects, neighbors, and try and listen, really listen. And often the project would actually get better. They would suggest things, and I would go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, instead of just fighting with them all the time. And there's a park, by the way, it's a beautiful park named after Sheila. She has passed away as well. Now, I wanted, people, most people learn best by, case studies. So I wanted to put a couple of case studies in here as to how a development manager might actually work. And I've told the story of Saunders Farm. Bill and Ann Saunders had a failing strawberry farm quite a few years ago now. It was a pick your own strawberry farm, and it was failing, and they wanted to do something with it rather than just sit there and go bankrupt. And they decided to add agritainment to their farm. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Let me just show you. Okay, so in the early days, they just hired a few high school students, to get dressed in kind of scary costumes and take kids on hay rides through the farm. And sure enough, in the first year, 10 or 12 or 13,000 people showed up and paid them $10 to go on some rides in September and October, kind of scary rides. But today, that farm has incredible facilities. Saunders Farm has, farm to table restaurants. It's got a wedding venue. It's got summer camps and all kinds of other things. But here's the thing. After they had opened and they were going for a few years, they got into some really difficult times with a neighbor and with bylaw. The bylaw officer and the urban planners all said you're going to have to rezone. And Bill and Ann Saunders were really, really reluctant to rezone from sort of a farm use to an amusement park. That could take years to do, and it might not have been successful, and it would have been very costly, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and possibly even the low millions. And they didn't have that kind of money. So what do? Well, you hire a development manager. That's what you do. And so here's Saunders Farm today, and you can see it's got all kinds of facilities. It's not big. It's like 40 acres, I think. And my daughter, one of my daughters, my oldest daughter, actually is getting married here to Patrick Kerr this summer. But they never, ever, ever rezoned it. What we did instead was we lobbied the city of Ottawa to change its official plan. Because the point that I made to the city was farming is hard and it's not easy to make a living. And I'll show you some pictures that will prove that. Okay, maybe you're not convinced yet. I'll come back to the farm in a second. Maybe you're not convinced yet. Well, think about Jabulani. This is a winery here in Ottawa. Oh, excuse me. And you know, I visited Jabulani, I guess last summer, and it's got a huge winery here. But guess what they do there? They do events. They do weddings, right? You can see some of the pavilions here, and they grow their grapes. There's an agricultural use. And so this is a project that one of my clients was looking at, buying some agricultural land. It's not very big. It's only a 22-acre site. And it has a house with a large barn on it. It's 22 acres. It does have some riverfront. It's only $600,000 for all kinds of goodies. But there was one problem. Days on market was very long. It didn't sell. Why? Because it turns out it's in the floodplain. But for this particular client, what he wants to do is he wants to turn it into a little village, similar to Saunders Farm, but with an ethnic theme to it. He's originally from India, and he would have micro gardens, and he'd have homesteading going on there, and a farm to table restaurant. And he loves goats, so he's going to raise goats, and he's going to have a petting zoo, and he's going to add all kinds of fun activities for people to do. And so, you know, you can see some more of these activities: farmers market, farm gate marketing, many other different kinds of things. So rather than go through a rezoning, which I think would be almost impossible, I said, you might do what Bill and Ann do, which is create a village by stealth. Now, how do you do that? Now, before I tell you the answer to that, let me show you. This is a very famous place, tourist place in BC, in British Columbia, on Vancouver Island. It's in Coombs, BC, a tiny little town. And this is a country store where they have a sod roof. And the reason they have a grass roof is that the original founders of this were from Norway, and that's how they made their roofs in Norway. They didn't have shingles, they had sod. But you don't want to get up on the roof and have to mow the grass. And so they put goats up there. That was just a way to, you know, keep the grass from growing too long on their roof. But it turned into an incredible tourism thing. It attracts, listen to this, in a village of about, I don't know, 1,000 people, they attract 5,000 visitors a day, and they employ up to 250 people in the summer in a village of like 1,000 people. So these animations, all right, are very valuable. And what I'm getting at is I believe the city of Ottawa and cities across North America should relax their zoning bylaws, their ordinances, and their official and master plans to allow this kind of thing to happen. And so it did. And let's see what Ottawa's official plan says. So I have a friend, he's a very senior planner at the city of Ottawa, and he really understands this stuff way better than I do. And he sent me this. So what it means is the agricultural resources policy now in the official plan require on-farm diversified uses. That means agritainment, to be secondary to the principal agricultural use of the property. So as long as you're using part of the property for a bona fide a farm thing, it could be these little micro gardens, for example, and they're being farmed by other people, you can have agritainment without having to go through rezoning. And this is very important over here. The person undertaking the agricultural use does not necessarily need to be the same person operating an on-farm use. So they can be different. So you could have a bunch of micro gardens that people are coming and enjoying while you are focused on the farm to table and event center. All right, everybody clear on that? That's in the official plan. And it goes on, and I won't go through all of this. This will be available on YouTube. You guys know that. So if you need to go and watch it again, you can stop and you can read the policies. But it's in the official plan now, and other cities and towns should adopt this as well, in my opinion. Here's a problem, though. If you hire an architect or an urban planner, and he or she goes to the city and she asks 3 different planners for is our agritainment uses permitted, you'll get 3 different answers. One will say yes, one will say no, and one will say maybe. And the one that says no, and the one that says maybe will say, you're probably safer to take it through a rezoning process. That is years of effort and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it does require somebody who has some skill. And you got to remember, if an urban planner tells you that this needs to be rezoned, he or she has just created a 2 or 3 year or 6, 7, 8, 9 year job for themselves. So you have to be a little bit suspicious, I think, of some of the advice. As I said, farming is hard. When we got the coach house bylaw through, and everybody knows Ottawa allows coach houses now, and other cities around North America are following Ottawa. And Ottawa's done some good things here. Initially, they wouldn't allow coach houses on farms, and I said, that's not going to work, guys. You know, we need, I mean, the people who really need the extra income from coach houses are not just rich dudes who live, you know, in sort of the glebe or Westboro or, you know, inner city. It's people who live in the rural areas. So the Ontario Federation of Agriculture said, this won't stand, and we're going to get 500 tractor loads of manure and dump it on City Hall if they don't allow rural areas to have coach houses too. And the city ought to give them credit, did agree, you know, to do that. So who needs help more? The farmer with 9 kids and a spouse living on $35,000 a year, or the rich dude living in the city? Well, you know the answer. And here's me, this is Bruce, with my friend Kelvin Burnett and his son Dan Burnett at Mr. Burnett's 90th birthday. He brought up 9 kids on $35,000 a year. So agritainment and coach houses and other kinds of things that help farmers is really, really important. Okay, that's enough. I'm just going to skip over here. So that's enough. All right, I'm going to change now. So I want to just show you again how a development manager might be a little bit more relevant to the people on this call. So I have a client who's going to build some multi-res in Ottawa, and he bought a site. It's zoned appropriately. He can just file a site plan and get going. But the local councillor wants commercial. All right. So the local councillor wants commercial at grade. And this site is zoned for 2 40-unit apartment buildings, multi-res apartment buildings, and maybe a third one of 20. So there might be as many as 100 units, but the local council wants the commercial at grade. That almost certainly, if you talk to an urban planner at the city, would require a rezoning. Now you want to please the local council. There's no doubt about that. And she has a reason why she is looking at that, because it makes sense from the city's point of view. They get 2 or 3, sometimes 4 times as much property tax from commercial assessment than they do from residential. So from the city's point of view, that kind of makes sense, right? They want more commercial. So they came to me and, you know, their hair is falling out. Mine's already fallen out, but their hair was falling out. We want to please the councillor, but we don't want to delay our project by 2 or 3 years. And for those of you who understand internal rates of return on projects, the killer is delay. So if you're like my poor friends at Clarence who buy 38 acres 9 years ago and take 9 years to get it through the subdivision process, and it's not through yet, although I think they'll register this year, they don't get their first dollar of revenue for 9 years. That is a long time to wait, right, for your first dollar of revenue. So there you go. So I said, well, let's see if we can come up with a workaround to avoid the rezoning, but at the same time to please the local councillor. So what I proposed is this, as their development manager, is this, that the ground floor would be built with a 12-foot slab to ceiling underside of the upper slab, 12-foot ceiling height, clear. And those units on the ground floor would actually have apartments, loft-style apartments, because 12-foot ceiling height allows you to have a loft effect, and you are allowed to have home-based businesses in a residential zone. So what this means, and I drew it up, and I'll see if I've got it here. These are my terrible drawings. You know, I'm an engineer, not an architect, so my drawings are terrible. So what this means is that your ground floor could have a very nice loft-style apartment here, and you walk through a door, and you have a home office in quotes, in front. So you do have commercial at grade, and in behind you have residential. I think that passes the zoning test, the existing zoning, because home-based businesses are allowed in almost all residential zones across North America. So in case you're wondering whether this actually exists, this is, I didn't reinvent, I didn't invent water. This is an example. I think this is on Montreal Road. You have a hairdressing salon in front, and you have an apartment in the back. So it's not unknown. And then this is another example, again, in Ottawa, where you have home-based businesses in the front and residential both behind and on top. So it does exist. It's just that your development manager has to know those kinds of things, so you don't spend 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars unnecessarily. All right. So are all architects order takers these days? I would say no. I wanted to introduce you to an architectural technologist. He's a friend of mine, Chris Jalcozy, who's like a genius. I mean, he, this is his drawing of him, not me drawing, but Chris is really, really, really clever. And I wanted to show you one of the things that he did. He told me, Bruce, did you know I was able to build a triplex in an R1 zone? I said, no way, Chris. He said, it's true, I live in it. And so here's how he did it. This is his actual house, and Chris lives up here on the top floor, and he's got, I think, a rooftop deck here, and he's got some other stuff going on here. But this is his home, and his secondary dwelling, which is a legal dwelling, is here. And then in the lower level, he's got a third unit, which is a home-based business. So he has put together a legal triplex in an R1 zone, and Chris is somebody, if you are doing any kind of imaginative infill work, this is a person that you want to talk to. And every city or town probably has a number of Chris Jalcozys in it. You just got to find them, right? Because you really need good quality development managers, because they can save you an incredible amount of time, energy, and frustration, not to mention money. So I'm almost done. Dan, you're going to have to get ready, because I'm going to put you on in a minute. As many of you know, I put together what I call the Firestone Institute, that's just me, Ninja Real Estate Investment and Co-Coaching course. And as I was starting to write this new handbook, Gadgets and Gizmos, I realized that the course that I recorded with my first 9 or 10 victims, I've got 6 months of recorded lectures, actually will train you to be a development manager too. So I didn't set out to do it, but it turns out that I did. So if you're interested in that course, if you want to know more about being a development manager, I've got 6 months of recorded material. And if you reach out to me, I will send you the first 3 webinars. You can look at them. If you like them or not, you can get a flavor for the course from it. But it does everything about how to become a real estate investment and business coach. It talks about how to become a better real estate investor and developer. And it also teaches you how to be a development manager, although that was an unintended consequence, I have to admit. But I'll send you the first 3 webinars. You have to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to share them. So this is my latest email signature. So for real estate investment and business coaching that'll help you provide for yourself and your family for 3 generations, that's me. And you can find me usually on email, pretty much 24/7, and by text as well. Oh, excuse me, by text as well. 613-762-8884. My email address is bruce.firestone@century1021.ca. And I also have this free service here. You guys don't have to worry about it, but lots of people use it, which is they can just book a clarity call with me. It's free, and they can go on this long URL here, and they can if you can just find my website, brucemfirestone.com, you or your friends can book a clarity call with me. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm sorry if I went on too long, but I think it might give you a flavor of something that I think is really important, and I do believe it will reshape cities and towns for the better if we can unleash a bunch of development managers on the world and seize back control of our towns from people who really don't know much about producing great cities and towns. And in great cities and towns is great opportunity for us as real estate investors, as real estate developers, as business owners, as entrepreneurs. So I really believe in this model, and the Gadgets and Gizmos, I was going to try and get it out for April, but I've been so bogged down, it'll probably be later this year by the time I get there. Dan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, so can you help me out here? How was that?
Sure.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was great. I really appreciate it. It's I can say from my side, I find it interesting when you're talking about the rezoning and some of the challenges that people go through. I meet many different individuals from many walks of life in any given year who are looking at some kind of construction or expansion project, and it's not something I envy to go through. So to have an expert that can help you deal with the city, to me, is like, whether they charge $100 or $200 an hour is some of the best money you can spend to get your project off the ground.
I do charge some money for coaching, and there's some other people on the call here that are also co-coaches now, and they charge a little bit of money. But, and this is very self-serving for me to say, but it is the lowest cost investment, Dan, and the highest ROI of anybody you'll hire. You hire an architect for a $2 million project, you're in for some tens of thousands of dollars. You hire a coach like me or Eva or Greg or some of the others I've trained, it's a fraction of the cost, and it can really save you a lot of money. So Dan, can you turn on your camera so people can see you?
Yep, here I am.
There he is. So Dan is a good friend and somebody that you can go to for unbiased advice on how to finance. And remember, I hope you understood where I was coming from, Dan. If people who are on this call who are watching it later, if they come to you with, I want to buy a duplex for my daughter, that's not you.
No, that's not my role. I'm in the deck that I provided. I'll go through kind of where we position ourselves in the market and how we can be very beneficial to entrepreneurs.
So you, Dan, and I will chirp in from time to time. But everybody, we haven't had a single question on the chat box yet. So make sure your fingers are busy and give us some questions, because I think it is more valuable for me and also for you and for Dan. If you do have any questions at all, please go ahead. So Dan, I've got the control of the slides. It's over to you.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. So thank you very much, everyone, for letting me have the opportunity to speak to the group today. Very informative session, Bruce. Really enjoyed that. I just wanted to, provide some information on who BDC is, what we do, and how we can help small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. BDC is positioned not as a competitive bank for, let's say, a TD or a Royal Bank. We're a complementary lender in the marketplace, where our role is to provide small and medium-sized entrepreneurs with financing solutions that they may not be able to get from a chartered bank, or other options that might better suit their cash flow. So, Bruce, if you want a slide. So we are the only bank exclusively devoted to entrepreneurs in Canada. We don't do any personal lending or anything on the personal side of the balance sheet. Next slide. We do have 123 business centers located across Canada. We currently, these numbers are from the end of our Q2, which would be September 30th, 2019. So we do have 60,000 entrepreneurs or borrowers. And there is 2,300 employees in our company, so we are a larger, smaller company for a bank. And last year we had a 94% client satisfaction rate, so it's very good for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Why are entrepreneurs vital to the economy? As we all know, the small business and is the backbone of the economy. 90% of private employment is by a small and medium-sized entrepreneur. 85% of private sector jobs created in the period where we had statistics 2001 to 2015 are by small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, and they account for 50% of the GDP of the business sector for Canada. So wow. Very important. Small and medium-sized businesses are a big part of Canada. If you look at this graph, I'm sure everyone has seen this at some point, but if you look at like a large company, I guess like I work for, or a big bank, it represents less than 0.2% of employers in Canada. Wow. So almost 100%, it's 99.8% of all employers in Canada are small and medium-sized enterprises. We have 3 areas that we work on. So we do have flexible financing, which I'll go over. The other side of the business that a lot of entrepreneurs may not know as well is we have a we have a side of our business called advisory services. So in Canada, excuse me, in Canada, if you are a small or medium-sized business, let's say you're doing 5 or maybe 8 million a year in operating sales, you'd have very limited options to go to for advice when it comes to maybe operational efficiency, or you want to build out a strategic plan, or maybe you want to look at winding your business down and selling it in 5 years. If you went to one of the big shops like a PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or KPMG, you're simply not large enough. They want to deal with firms that are dealing, 50 to 100 million plus. So even if you're willing to pay their bills, they still probably wouldn't be able to offer the service. So again, the government of Canada decided to create this arm of BDC. And essentially, it gives us a very unique ability to offer consistent advice from coast to coast. And we get access to benchmarking through StatsCan. So we have a lot of very good statistics behind our advisory services. I can tell you if we're working with a welder in Ottawa, we can tell you kind of where they stand in profitability or sales compared to a similar welder with, let's say, 5 staff in BC. So are they more profitable here or not? The last one is our smart capital. I won't get into that too much. Essentially, BDC does own the largest venture capital fund in Canada still. However, those are for larger, very, very accelerated growth companies. So I'll touch on it briefly, but not in depth. Next slide. Very interesting report that we had come out last year. It is based on some dated information, but we did a study that showed that between 2009 and 2012, during the recession, when small and medium-sized entrepreneurs accessed both our financing and advisory, as opposed to just one or the other service, they were 4.7% more profitable or had higher sales or employment growth than their reported competition who only took one of our services. And again, 9 out of 10 clients that we surveyed last year said that we had a very positive impact on the outcome of their business. This is sort of a pie chart or breakdown of the industries we work with. So we are agnostic. We work with every industry across Canada. We do have some industries that we're not allowed to work with from an ethical standpoint, reputational risks. So these include things like the firearm and tobacco industry. We still are not able to work in the marijuana industry. It'll probably be some time till we get some credible data on the impact of that decision to Canada. But other than that, almost any business would qualify under our guidelines.
Dan, I got a question for you from Rick Rose. He
Sure.
said if he buys a residential property, but it's for business purposes, such as a non-assistant seniors residence, is that the kind of thing that he can come to BDC for?
So on the residential side, there's 3 government sort of institutions in Canada that help the economy. So we're on the business side, which is business development. There's another institution called Farm Credit Canada. They deal on the agriculture side. And when we get into the residential side, it's kind of a little bit of a gray zone because that industry is governed by CMHC, as we know. So when it comes to residential, the reason why we don't move into that space is simply because that is CMHC's territory. They do insure the private sector banks on default for purposes. But the other reason is because, again, we're a Crown Corporation, we can't be seen as securing somebody's residence and then having to evict them out of their house, okay? That's just, again, for reputational risk. A couple of years ago, so to get to your question, we decided to cut back our ability to finance seniors or residential housing. They are a business, no doubt. It's a very growing business. So from an entrepreneur standpoint, yes, it is a business. But at the end of the day, those seniors who are living there, that is their home. And again, we couldn't be seen as ever having to repossess a property and then having to remove people out of their home. So I guess the short answer is we would not be able to do that.
Okay.
Typically, we have had some of our best times when the rest of the country has lending institutions have pulled back their lending. In the last 20 years, these are 3 examples of when we really stepped up. So typically when when recessions step in is when we do our best. When we go through economic times, kind of like we have over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of liquidity in the market. A, there's not as much of a need for us to lend, and B, the private sector is willing to fill that gap. We have all seen what's happened over the last 6 weeks. So going into the remainder of this year is yet to be seen if we will end up with a higher lending mandate. But that's what we're hearing so far, but nothing has been official yet. Next slide. So this is just a couple examples of what we do not do. So no guaranteed investment certificates, no grants, no investments, no term deposits. We don't do operating lines of credit. We are a term lending facility only. Non-commercial loan or residential loans are not a space we play in, and we do not have bank accounts or credit cards. So, next slide. So this is just getting into our financing side. We can provide capital for really any need. Whether that's accessing working capital to grow your company, you need to hire people, buying a business, you want to buy some real estate, purchase equipment, set up a new distribution hub so you can export to new markets, invest in new technology, or start a brand new company. We can provide a solution for, within guidelines, obviously, for any of these needs. Next slide, please. Just a couple of things that make us very different from a traditional chartered bank. We typically can offer longer repayment periods, repayment schedules to match your cash flow cycle. So the easiest example I have on that is I have a client, he owns a very large campground. It's very seasonal. He makes 1 mortgage payment a year. So he pays September 1st. It's just, and he pays interest all year, interest only. And then instead of making 12 payments, he makes 1 payment. So we can do that, or 6 payments, or I have a lot of seasonal construction that obviously do 80% of their business during the 5 months it's nice. So usually we take 5 payments a year during those good times so they can free up their cash flow.
So Rick, buy a campground, not a assisted seniors residence.
Yeah, exactly. A higher risk tolerance. Typically, we do have a higher appetite for risk than the charter banks do. Terms and conditions that don't change. What that means is we do not have financial covenants attached to our lending guidelines. Most banks, so when times get tough, as long as the entrepreneur pays our loan, we will just keep collecting. So we're considered what's called a non-demand lender. So once our money's out the door, we can never ask for it back as long as we're being paid. And we don't take any personal assets as guarantees, so we're never going to put a lien on your house. Next slide. This is just a picture of an entrepreneur owning, she owns like a beauty salon. I believe this is in Toronto. So next slide. Advisory services. Next slide. So our goal, entrepreneurs, no matter what size of business you're in, eventually at some point throughout your career, you are going to need to get some kind of outside advice to help you move to the next phase or the next stage, or help fulfill a goal with your business. We work with experts in every industry that can help any entrepreneur between essentially 2 and 100 million in sales accomplish whatever goal they're looking to do. So next slide, Bruce. I just want to touch briefly on operational efficiency. We are the largest provider of operational efficiency advice in Canada. It really focuses around 3 main areas, which is meet production demands, quick response to changing needs, and sustain profitable growth. Next slide, Bruce. Operational efficiency really is one thing. It identifies waste. What's happening in your business that shouldn't be? How are you not operating at peak capacity? And these are 8 forms of that are found very commonly in a lot of different businesses for waste: overproduction, inventory management, transportation, inefficient operations. These are all things that we would identify within an entrepreneur's business, and then provide advice on how to fix it, and then show them how to do it. Next slide.
I think with all due respect, probably the most inefficient sector that I know of is the real estate business, construction and development business. You know, when you think about poor old Claridge taking 9 years to get a 38-acre subdivision approved, that is very inefficient. I don't care what the city of Ottawa or Claridge or any of the people involved, the planners involved say. That's a terrible waste of manpower and time. And then you won't have heard me say it, but I say if the tech business was like the real estate business, every time I got into my car with my iPhone, I'd have 3 semi-trailers full of knobs and tubes following me to make it work. And
Yes.
I mean, our business is just notoriously inefficient and ineffective. So I think a lot of us could in fact use some coaching and some advice. And I think that, you know, I'm a coach, so you know, I'm obviously self-interested in this, but I agree with you. There's lots and lots of stats, guys, that show that people who reach out to coaches, mentors, people like Dan and others at BDC and elsewhere for advice, they do tend to grow faster.
And I'll just tell you a little story. There is hope for change. I don't know if everyone on the call is familiar. There's a town south of Ottawa called Kemptville, and it's in a regional municipality called North Grenville. I do quite a bit of work down there. It is a large and growing community.
Yeah.
And for the last number of years, they've been known as one of the more challenging municipalities to work with getting buildings approved. I went to a seminar about a year and a half ago now, where the builders had got together and produced what they called a builder customer satisfaction report for the city, kind of a reverse view of what they would give their customers. And it wasn't a time to complain, but it was a pretty scalding, assessment of how they're being treated in that community. And there's a new mayor there. Her name is Nancy Peckford, I believe. Nice lady. I've met her several times. And after she got her feet wet, first time in politics, she was voted in as the new mayor of North Grenville and Kemptville. And within a year, she had completely turned the planning department on its head. And 6 months after letting go and making some changes within their staff, I spoke with a builder about 2 weeks ago because I have a project going on there now, and it is now one of the more friendly communities to do business in.
Yeah.
So there is hope.
And I agree with you. And I think when I talked about the role of the development manager as a facilitator, you know, he or she is the person who would sit with the mayor, with the councilors, with the planning committee, with urban planners and others, you know, and talk sense, you know, maybe common sense. And if you think about it, not just Kemptville, but the city of Ottawa has actually made some progress, even though I was critical of them and have been for many years. They have some new management in the planning department in the city of Ottawa, and they've done some really neat things. You saw the cool stuff. You saw the cool stuff that they did with coach houses in the city of Ottawa. You saw what they've done with the official plan to allow people like Bill and Ann Saunders and others, Jabulani, to add agritainment. So we are seeing some little green shoots, but I you know, before I get too much older, Dan, I'd like to see a little bit more progress.
Yep.
Just before I turn it back to you, Terry asked, would BDC be able to help in the purchase of mini storage businesses? Dan, you typed in an answer. You want to just expand on that a bit?
Yeah, we definitely can get involved in that. We are, I actually have a couple in my portfolio. We get involved in everything. That does fall under what we do have some restrictions on the amount of lending we can do on those facilities. That's all. Will we do them? Absolutely. But possibly looking more at a lower loan to value than what I might be able to do on a traditional operating manufacturing facility.
So one of the things that you told me, Dan, quite some time ago, this is not recent, but quite some time ago, you did tell me that there is some processes that you can apply where, yes, the loan to value mortgage is lower than maybe an entrepreneur would like, but if the cash flow is there, you can top it up. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, in certain cases, depending again. So if you're, let's say, take just a pure play mini storage, we'd be limited, you know, around 65% loan to value on that facility, because we consider it what's called a single use property. The reality is if we had to repossess that property, no one is going to be interested in that unless they're looking to purchase a mini storage. Because without the mini storage, it basically is just raw land in its current form. It's not like it's a warehouse where, you know, manufacturer business A leaves and 10 others want to go in there. Now, in regards to maybe getting a higher loan to value, would depend on the cash flow. So, you know, has the seller really maximized their sale by ensuring that every unit is full? You know, they have annual increases, or is it half empty? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, let's move
on. Essentially, the main goal of the operational efficiency mandate is to reduce waste and add value to your business. This is not an official statement, but with clients that I've worked with over the last 4 years, I do probably 3 to 4 operational efficiency mandates a year, and the average is about a 10-to-1 return on investment. So, you know, if they spend $10,000 on a mandate, they'll probably see up to $100,000 of return, either through efficiencies, bottom line, or additional sales. You know, and then from there. So it's all about creating value for the entrepreneur. Next slide, please, Bruce. Another owner. This is more of a manufacturer up in, I believe this one is in Waterloo. Next slide. So why should this concern us with regards to being efficient at business? Next slide, Bruce. Canadian entrepreneurs have very significant challenges. Some of them we can easily say maybe we brought on ourselves, but the bottom line is it's very challenging for entrepreneurs to scale up in this country. We do have sluggish productivity when we compare ourselves to someone like the US, who's really our main competitor, because they're you know, just south of us. Canadians have had a lot slower adoption of technology to use in their business when you compare to the same industries in Europe or in the US. And we have limited market development. So we all know we've been in a kind of a declining manufacturing sector in Canada for the last 20 years, which has resulted in less and less people exporting. So
why do Canadians have such a huge productivity gap, and why are we having so much trouble scaling?
Well, I think it has, like, you know, I can't speak out of term here, but I believe it does have a lot with how we govern in the country as well. Where you know, we're only 37 million people. We've got a massive country. So it just costs more to move product from A to B. There's not as many customers to consume those goods when they get to those end location. As you said, we're not very efficient at you know, helping business move through. If you want to come in, like you just said with Claridge, to build a bunch of new homes, what's you know, 9 years? It's not very efficient, right? So if I've got $3 million and I want to invest in a new subdivision, am I going to come to Ottawa where it might take me 5 years, or am I going to go to a Kentville or a different province even where I might be able to get it done in 6 months?
Well, I can tell you that Roger Staubach, if you know the name, he was with the Dallas Cowboys back in the day. He ran a very successful real estate development company, and he came to Ottawa and did one project here, and he told me, he said, Bruce, man, with that Texas accent of his, I don't think I'll be doing any more projects here in your town. And I said, why is that, Mr. Staubach? And he said, it is really hard to get approval.
No, it's very challenging. So
got a couple questions for you. One is from Chris. Hi,
yep.
Dan. What was the title of the planner experience report delivered to North Grenville's mayor?
I think they called it the local. I can get a copy. I mean, I can get more information on that.
Can you actually get a copy of it, Dan?
Yep.
So one of the things that I do, as you know, I put this recording up on YouTube and I send it to everybody. But if you had a copy of the report, it's public, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
As long as it's public. So Chris, I'll get a copy of it from Dan, and I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy. Now we've got one other question here for you from
Sure.
Kevin Bessie. Can BDC help new startups?
Yeah, we do definitely do startups. The best thing I have to say on a startup is that we need I don't like a 70-page business plan. We just need basically a, you know, do we have a credible plan from a manager who has experience, right? There's a big difference between someone saying, you know, I've been in this industry for 10 years and now I want to go out on my own versus, you know, I just took a package from the federal government because I put my hand up and I want to go start a restaurant. Well, you know, what experience do you have in doing that? It's really important to have a good personal credit in these examples, some net worth, given the age, and I will say that. So, you know, if I have a 25-year-old that comes to me, I don't expect them to have $200,000 in the bank. But when I have someone in their 60s coming, you know, we should see some evidence of some net worth, right, given the age. And we like to see some ownership investment in that, but definitely we definitely can do startups. It's simple as that. Next slide. This is kind of interesting. So starting this year, which might be our saving grace from whatever's happening in the world, whatever happens with the outcome of the last 6 weeks, we have a serious problem coming to Canada that starts this year. In 2001, 2002, 2003, you can pick any year you want. For every 100,000 retirees in Canada, there was about 200,000 people coming into the workforce. That was new immigrants and university graduates. Starting this year, that number is going to close. That number is going to close to almost zero. Wow. Which means that for the next 10 years, this was a massive study we did over 2018-19 in all sectors from coast to coast, and essentially. For the next 10 years, we are going to experience a massive employment gap. So, you know, the computer is not going to put the truck driver out of business, at least until probably 2030 from our projections, because there's just simply a labor shortage. Next slide, please. Why is this happening? Essentially, the baby boomers are retiring. Millennials are stepping in, and immigrants will, and the only thing is that immigrants will sustain our workforce. So even with the increased numbers that the current government brought in last year, some of the experts internally still think it will not be enough to close our labor shortage that we will see. So what I mean by that is if everyone has a job, then mostly everyone can pay their bills. If no one has a job, then the housing market could be affected, but right now, with interest rates where they are, it seems that everyone has a job. We should be able to pay our bills. Next slide. How is this affecting small business? Essentially, you're going to have to figure out a way to do more with less, and that doesn't matter which business you're in. We have a client. This is a story. He's in welding, north of Waterloo, and he hired another business, which is also a BDC client, and he was having such a hard time getting qualified welders that he ended up hiring this individual, and he told them, I will train employees from A to Z. I just need you to find me a good person. And this company went out and recruited people who worked in convenience stores at 3 a.m. And the thought process behind that was, if you are willing to stand in a convenience store at 3 a.m., then you clearly want to work. How about I get you out of here and maybe pay you $65,000 a year and train you to be a certified welder?
You know what, Dan, what Toby Lutke told me and a number of other people is that they aren't actually looking for coders at Shopify. They're looking for people with creativity, people with focus, people with ability, people with imagination. And he said, we can teach them Ruby on Rails. We can teach them how to be a coder, but we can't teach them how to be creative and imaginative and hardworking and focused. That we can't teach.
Yeah, so it's so that was an interesting story. We got an update about 6 months ago, and that business owner now has 3 successful recruits that way that are now working.
Yeah. I got another question for you from Eva O'Grady. She's one of the co-coaches on the call here. Wouldn't you expect millennials to be able to fill the employment gap and the employment vacancies? Are there not enough millennials?
Well, I can't answer that. What I do know is that if you look at Ottawa, again, I don't know how many people are on the call in Ottawa, but You know, I'll use the word like a dump truck driver. If we think of that work, you can't find them right now. There is absolutely no one qualified to drive a dump truck. So if you're a young person and you don't have a job, you can go to Algonquin College in a weekend and get your driver's license, written test. You can then do the training, and you can apply to be a driver, and you get picked up probably within a week. Do they want to do that? I can't answer that question. Is that the kind of work people want? Well, you know, I mean, look at who's driving dump trucks. There's not a lot of 20-year-olds.
Absolutely.
So another owner, this is just an example of a food manufacturer. So we're very big into food processing. So next slide, Bruce. Capital, I'll touch on this briefly. Next slide, Bruce. Essentially, we have a division called Growth and Transition. What is it? It's exactly kind of what the name is. So it's for very fast growing companies or large companies that are transitioning their business. So things like a large management buyout, an acquisition, you know, someone who might be going from 10 to 20 million and they might require $3 million of unsecured capital to grow. When you get to those financing levels, you really have to start thinking about taking on partners possibly. This section of division of BDC can come in as that equity partner. So this division can allow for equity-like financing where they may come in and provide that liquidity and participate in your growth over a period of time. So they would participate in the rate of return. So, you know, we're not looking at 6% here. This is mid to high teen rates of return. But when BDC Capital exits our strategy, the business owner retains 100% ownership of their business.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very important point for everybody, because even in the real estate business, I caution people that I don't really like partners. You know, there's still two chairs in heaven, Dan, waiting for the first two partners to get there and like each other. So what I have been working on are models that I call non-partnership partnership models, where you are joint venturers, but at the end of the day, you exit. Right?
Yes.
There's a planned strategy here, because I think it's very important for people to own their own businesses, to own their own real estate, and not to have partners, because partners inevitably will have different agenda. For example, maybe Dan, you and I would own, you know, a 100-unit multi-residential building together, and you say, Bruce, I'm going to hold on to this for the next, you know, 50 years, and I say, well, Dan, I'd like to sell it and, you know, go retire in Costa Rica, and so we end up fighting. And so I really believe in that model, the BDC model, where at the end of the day, BDC would have a staged exit, and the entrepreneur owns his or her own business 100% again.
Yeah, so we can call this cheap equity, expensive debt, but for the most part, when this solution is appropriate for an entrepreneur, it is a very, very good solution. So
I think so too.
Next slide. We have over 2018 and 19, we've created a big focus on female entrepreneurs. So next slide, Bruce. We have this is an internal goal. This is an internal goal of net new lending of a $1.4 billion to female-owned businesses over 3 years. So 50-50 partnerships do count. So if it's a husband and wife, we will consider that a female entrepreneur still. But the goal is to get more money out to female entrepreneurs. And I'll go through some credit examples. These are transactions I have done over the last 6 months. So very simple, client wants to purchase some inventory, went to their charter bank. Charter bank wasn't interested. So they came to BDC, and essentially what we did, this was for a growth project, a one-time growth project. So client got a $500,000 purchase order from the government to do some work. And then their sales level would probably return to normal after that. So they needed to bulk up.
So Dan, can you explain the difference to everybody? I know you know it, but some people might not. What's the difference between a line of credit and working capital?
So a line of credit would be for your operating cycle of your business. It's cash to order. What is it going to cost you to get from cash to, order to cash? you need to order your inventory, you need to manufacture whatever you're doing or deliver the service you're doing, and then you bill your customer and you get paid. If you don't have the money to cover those costs and so you get paid, then you need to get an operating line to bridge that gap. Working capital, again, would be another form, but it's project-based financing. So in this case, this client got an extra contract from the federal government. So it was going through a growth period, but the following year, they would return to most likely the same sales level they were doing in previous years. So the operating line, the bank's not going to increase that for a one time, so we fill the gap. This is an interesting one I did. This was for a very unique piece of machinery for a company. It was a $800,000 piece of machinery, and the client's cash flow at this time of year was quite tight, but they're a very, very profitable company. But it made no sense to take their cash flow and just buy the machinery. It made sense to finance it. So they went to their chartered bank, and in this case, they were commercial clients. They had a very good relationship with the Scotia Bank, and Scotia said, "Well, we'll look at this machinery, and we'll do 50 cents on the dollar. That's just what we're willing to do." So they came to me and said, "Sorry, I apologize." They said, "We will do 75% loan to value on a $400,000 piece of machinery." There was two of these. So if you look, basically, if they were buying $425,000 piece of machinery and using the Scotiabank to facilitate that, the loan amount would be $320,000. So they would have to come out of pocket of $105,000 from their cash flow, and there'd be no additional money for soft costs related to that machinery. Everyone forgets, you have to take machinery out, you need to install your new machinery, you need to train your employers on that new equipment, and then you have to do test runs. So there's going to be a lot of money out of your pocket before that new piece of equipment starts to generate profit for you. So we do up to 125% financing on equipment. So in this case, we financed 100% of that piece of equipment, and we gave the entrepreneur $100,000 additional dollars to pay for those soft costs or to bridge the gap. We put them on interest-only payments for 12 months so that they can get that machinery profitable for them. Now, the downside is, yes, we are a little bit more expensive, but interest rate is not always the most important thing when it comes to business.
I'd like to comment on that, Dan, as well. For most entrepreneurs, their internal rate of return is anywhere from 20 to 28%. That is true. Real estate, business, their internal rates of return, otherwise they wouldn't be entrepreneurs, they wouldn't be business owners. If you can make 20 to 22, 24, maybe as much as 28% per annum, you wouldn't do it. Whether it's buying a piece of machinery or buying a piece of real estate, you have to look at your internal rate of return. That's how professional investors actually analyze, not cap rates. Cap rates are useful, but not enough. And so if you're borrowing at 3.5% or 5.5% or 5.25%, and your internal rate of return is 22%, you can see it almost doesn't matter. Now, maybe I shouldn't say that in front of Dan, because next time I go with a client to Dan, he'll say, well, the interest rate doesn't matter. Of course it does, but not if you're making those kind of numbers. Now, we've only got 2 minutes left, Dan. I have a question for Belinda. Belinda is asking, does BDC lend to commercial residential, which is not covered by CMHC?
Yeah, we do. We just don't take the residential component into our debt servicing coverage. So Bruce, maybe fire through a couple. They can look at this on YouTube. This is a change of ownership scenario. Go to the next slide, Bruce. This is another larger change of ownership scenario with a number of solutions to get the client, again, to preserve capital. Next slide, Bruce. I'll get into the real estate because I know we're tight for time here. These are 2 transactions I did because I think these are the 2 that might find most interesting to your group. So this was a purchase of a commercial building in the Valley. It actually was in Petawawa. We did a building condition assessment on it. They determined based on what they want to do. There was a residential component to this. There was 3 apartments, and they renovated 50,000 per unit. Soft cost to close with an environmental phase 1. The closing costs, like your land transfer tax, it wasn't 25,000, but we include that in the program. We ended up financing 650, and the investment from shareholders was $75,000.
So Belinda, you should really focus on this slide, because kind of BDC is kind of talking out of both sides of its mouth here. But if you look at that, that is close to 90% financing.
Yes, but how this worked is we didn't take the rental income. What we did is I'm basing this program on this entrepreneur's business that was going to be occupying the first level. So again, it wasn't a rent strategy. It was the profit from this person's business can pay this mortgage.
Exactly.
Okay? This is another one I did. So this is a client in Ottawa. They had 5 locations. They were looking for a central warehouse, and warehousing in Ottawa is just a hot commodity right now.
Wow, is it ever?
They went further again out into the valley. Again, not where the charter banks love to go. Found a beautiful warehouse for $1.2 million. They wanted to do a full gut job of this place, so $250,000 renovation budget, soft cost closing. Total program $1.5 million. We lent them $1.2 million. Another lender lent $150,000. There was another partner that we use outside the city of Ottawa. There's access to another very flexible government lender. They provided $150,000, and investment from new shareholders was $150,000. So again, about a 10% overall rate of return, but a lot of the banks will not include the renovation. We will use the renovation cost in our security calculation, because we know that once you're done the renovation, the building will be worth $1.5 million.
That is incredible. That's really helpful, Dan.
Yeah. Lastly, every year we have Small Business Week. We are the sponsor of that event throughout Ottawa. It's a great week, very busy. We were the ones that started that, but there's a lot of great events that go on. It's in October every year. Next slide, Bruce. And there is a ton of free information on our website.
I've used this. I mean, you saw my slides. I use this all the time.
Yeah, tons of information. And everything from business plans to case studies, everything. So, yeah, and just more. So I know we're tight for time here. So thank you very much, Bruce, for having me. I'd be happy if anyone has any questions. Please feel free to send me an email. I'd be more than happy to answer anyone's questions. And I'd appreciate you thinking of me in the future if you ever have any opportunities, especially on the real estate side.
So, Dan, is it okay if people who are not in Ottawa reach out to you for some advice?
Yeah, absolutely. My territory, we work across Canada. I have partners across Canada. I go all the way up to Deep River, to the Algonquin Park border, Barry's Bay, Perth, Carleton Place.
Well, we got a question from Rick Rose in Windsor. And so, Rick, what I would suggest to you is Dan has said you can reach out to him by email, and he has a network. He's connected all across Canada. So whether you're listening in Vancouver or you're listening in Windsor like Rick is, reach out to Dan at daniel.stevens, well, that's with a V, at bdc.ca. I trust Dan. I know he has, he is really in our corner as entrepreneurs, and I can tell you there are not that many lenders I can tell you what I can say that about. So I want to thank everybody for sticking with us as long as you have. And Dan, this has been fantastic. I'll say goodbye to everybody. And again,
thank you very much, everyone.
Bravo. See ya.